Good evening. It is amazing to me that in 43 years of attending assemblies faithfully, there are still songs we sing that I'm like, I don't know that I have ever heard that song before. That being one of them, other than it gives me a creepy feeling of Sun Valley days. Like, I don't know if it's from way back then, but I have this second grade memory of Sun Valley days whenever we sing that song. So, good to be here with you tonight. So, we're going to continue on in our series that we've been doing essentially the whole year, just here and there. And we're on the second to last lesson of this series. So there is an end to this that we're getting to. Really clapping? That's what we're going to, okay. So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of decision making and just the way that we as Christians are going to think through and do things differently than the rest of the world is going to do it. And we've talked about a lot of different principles as a part of that. So many at this point that you probably can't even read them on the screen anymore because the text is getting too small for you to see them. But I think it's good for us to continue to dig through these. And we're going to spend most of our time, if you want to go ahead and open your Bible to Nehemiah, we're going to spend some time in Nehemiah and the book of Esther tonight. There's an interesting contrast that is made between Nehemiah and Esther and their particular stories. Even though they are contemporary to each other, they lived at about the same time. I doubt they would have known each other, but they would have at least been alive near the same time, dealing with many of the same cultural issues, maybe even having some sort of interaction, at least with one another's families. There is a dramatic difference in the way that their stories unfold. And it is all based off of this idea of identity and the fact that they were able to make decisions based on who they were, what people they were a part of. And I hope maybe by the end of tonight's lesson you can see how that applies to us. Also, if we will let our identity be our guide. That's not a hard concept for us in most ways. We know that who we are is going to influence the choices that we make. And the truth is, not having a clear sense of who you are is going to dramatically affect just how many decisions are out there for you. I remember back during the Lion King, the cartoon Lion King, there's this scene in there after Simba. I know I'm talking to an older crowd that probably hasn't seen Lion King in a long, long time, but you've got this scene in there where Simba, the young lion, has made some bad mistakes. I know, this was a camp theme for my wife one year, so she can't hear this lesson without boo-hooing because it reminds her of her camp days. But we've got Simba who has made some bad mistakes. He has taken a friend of his into the Badlands, and they got themselves in trouble with some hyenas, and they are rescued from that by big bad Mufasa, who is Simba's dad, the king. And Mufasa takes Simba on a walk, and they have a long discussion overlooking a precipice, overlooking the lands that they're in charge of. And the key phrase that Mufasa says is, remember who you are. The idea that because of Simba's identity, that he was the prince and he was going to be the next king, he had to make certain choices that other people would not have had to make. He would have to guide his future based on the identity that he had as the coming future king of the lands. And that made a difference. For anybody else, they could have chosen to go anywhere they want to. But because Simba is somebody important, because Simba is somebody who could be used to influence the king, because Simba's identity, Simba didn't have all the freedoms that everybody else had. His identity essentially limited his choices. When we don't have a clear sense of identity, we have really limitless choices that we can choose from. There is no moral choice or immoral choice. There is no right and wrong. There is no, well, this wouldn't be wise or this would be foolish. You don't really deal with that. Our identity, the way we picture ourselves and understand ourselves, limits those things incredibly. I am a husband. That is one role that I play in life. Does that limit me? Am I limited in my choices and things that I should do or shouldn't do because I am a husband? Yes, absolutely it does. Like Job 31 verse 1 says, I have made a covenant with my eyes to look on no one but my wife. That is a limitation he places on himself because he is in the covenant of marriage. I have a similar covenant with my eyes, as should all husbands. It absolutely changes the way you're going to make decisions. I don't make big financial decisions without my wife involved. Just yesterday, I'll tell on myself, I bought an album, and my wife comes out and goes, "Hey, you enjoying the new album?" "Yes." "Don't spend any more money." Like that was, we've got to discuss any money we're spending right now. I mean, it was not a abrasive way, just remember, we've got to be more careful. And the fact that we are in a marriage means we can do that. We can limit one another's choices. That is an appropriate way to act. As a father, I have a limited amount of choices that I can make. Because being a father makes a lot of things just off the table. Years ago, we were talking to some friends of ours, and the dad, who loves to play guitar just like I do, decided to use their entire tax return of around $10,000, if I remember correctly, to buy himself a brand new guitar. Did not ask his wife, did not clear it by the family, just went out and bought a guitar because it's what would make him happy. And not only is that not wise as a husband, it wasn't wise for him as a father. There were plenty of other things they could have spent that money on and done so in service to the family. And therefore, being a father should have limited him from that choice. And there are times when that identity makes a difference. I'm a preacher. There are ways in which that limits me. I have not for over 20 years been able to move into a town and choose which church I want to go to. Because when I move to a town, I already know what church I'm going to be attending. It's the one I'm going to be preaching at that Sunday, right? That makes a difference. It limits my choices. It limits my freedoms. It limits my liberty because of the identity. Because I am a friend, I'm going to act a certain way. Just every role, every hat that I wear is going to limit me. But let me reword that in a positive way. It's going to bring me clarity. It's not really about freedoms being limited as much as it is about me having a clear vision of what I'm supposed to do and the decisions that I'm supposed to make because I know who I am. Like Mufasa said, remember who you are. It makes a difference. So how does being a Christian bring clarity? Does your identity and being attached to Jesus and being a part of the new covenant, being a member of this kingdom or a citizen of heaven, how does that clarify the way that you're going to live your life? Because I think it most definitely should if we are truly living the way Christians know they should be living. Now, Nehemiah was not a Christian, but he was somebody who had a clear sense of who he was. Open up to Nehemiah, if you've not done that already. In the book of Nehemiah, we've got the story of a man who is a captive in a foreign land. He's not at home. He is a cupbearer in the king's house in Persia. Well, he hears that the walls, a report comes in that the walls of Jerusalem still have not been rebuilt, and it leaves the city exposed to danger, to enemies, to all sorts of difficulty, and he is distraught about that. Why? He doesn't live in Jerusalem. He, as far as we know, has never lived in Jerusalem, because this is probably well over 70 years after they have been taken captive away from Jerusalem. My guess is Nehemiah possibly has never even visited Jerusalem. Why does he care? He cares because he is an Israelite. He cares because he cares about his people. Verse 3 and 4 of chapter 1, they said to me, the remnant in the province who survived the exile are in great trouble and disgrace. Jerusalem's walls have been broken down, and its gates have been burned. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the heavens. He cares. He hears a report that things aren't where they should be, and he weeps and he fasts and he prays because he wants things to be right for his people. And dare I say, right for his God. You have his prayer there in the rest of chapter 1, and then chapter 2, we start with this. During the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of the king Artaxerxes, when wine was set before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had never been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, why are you sad when you aren't sick? There is nothing but sadness of heart. I was overwhelmed with fear and replied to the king, may the king live forever. Why should I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruin and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Here, a couple of things to note here. One is, it clearly had an effect on him. He, according to some reports, I'm not sure exactly how true this is, it was not just frowned upon to be sad in the king's presence, but if you were not of the disposition the king wanted you to be, he could even have you killed. I've never verified that on secular record. I've just always heard that said. But here it is noticeable that when the king points out that Nehemiah is sad, what is his emotional reaction to that? I was scared. I was fearful. And so he's fearful, but he does tell the king what's going on. Second thing to note. Notice the king's response to what Nehemiah says is not, what are you talking about? What people? You know that his response is, what is your request? The king knows exactly what Nehemiah is talking about. He knows exactly where Nehemiah is from. He knows what nationality Nehemiah is. Nehemiah has been openly a Jew. And the king has some interaction with him about that. You keep reading through the story of Nehemiah, and you find that Nehemiah already, before the king brings it up, and before he has this response, already has a plan in place for exactly how this problem can be fixed. He has not just mourned about the problem of Jerusalem, but he has imagined and created a plan to fix the problem in Jerusalem. And so when the king asks, what is your request? Nehemiah is prepared. He knows exactly what they need to do. He knows they need letters for certain kings between Persia and Jerusalem so that they can have safe travel back. He knows he wants to travel. He knows what kind of supplies he's going to need to make that happen. He knows how many people he needs to take with him to make that happen. He has a plan ready because he is a man who is fixated on his identity. When Nehemiah does face opposition, you get over to chapter 4 and verse 9. Here, Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs are the ones who keep causing problems. They're causing problems currently. They've all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem in verse 8 and throw it into confusion. Listen to this. So we prayed. We prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night. He just keeps going. Chapter 4, verse 20. Again, whenever you hear the trumpet sound, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work, while half of the men were holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. Even when he faces opposition from enemies outside of the city, he has a plan in place and ready to go, but the one thing he will not do is stop doing the work. Because that's the whole thing he's trying to accomplish. You get over to chapter 5, starting in verse 6. Here, he starts to run into some opposition among his own people. They are concerned about the opposition and about whether they're going to get things done and how they're going to feed themselves if they run into difficulty. So it says, verse 6, I became extremely angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After seriously considering the matter, I accused the nobles and the officials, saying to them, each of you is charging his countrymen interest. So I called a large assembly against them and said, we have done our best to buy back our Jewish countrymen who were sold to foreigners, and now you sell your own countrymen and we have to buy them back. They remained silent and could not say a word. Then I said, what you are doing isn't right. And he essentially enacts a law that says you cannot charge your countrymen interest. And he fixes the problem, but one of the things you notice is they continue the work. When you get over to chapter 6, starting in verse 11, again, the same thing. Chapter 6, verse 11, those on the outside decide they're going to attack again. It says here, should a man like me run away? How can someone like me enter the temple and live? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him because of the prophecy he spoke against me. Tobiah and Sanballat had hired this prophet who supposedly came in and spoke for God and telling them to stop doing the work. He was hired so that I would be intimidated, do as he suggested, and get a bad reputation in order that they could discredit me. Well, he doesn't stand for that either. And all of this is focused on this idea of Nehemiah from the very beginning knew that he as a Jew had a responsibility to his own people, and it guided every decision along the way. Everything he did with purpose. Everything he did because the work needed to be done. And it is absolutely astonishing to me every time I read this one verse. Chapter 6, verse 15. The wall was completed in 52 days on the 25th day of the month of Elul. 52 days. That is an incredible project to go through with people who were not masons. They were not wall builders. They weren't people who were used to that kind of work. They were doing the work sometimes one-handed because they had to have a weapon in the other hand. They were doing the work together. He got all of the people. He rallied them together. He organized them to get this work done, and they got the work done in 52 days. It's incredible. Flip over to the book of Esther. The book of Esther, we've got a woman who is, again, living in the Persian Empire. We know that in her story, she is one who, the king is a bit of a bumbling fool, at least the way he's presented here in this book. And he gets rid of his queen and wants to find a new queen, and you've got this whole competition among the women, essentially, of who's going to become the next queen of Persia, and Esther ends up winning. But notice here, chapter 2, verse 10 says, Esther did not reveal her ethnicity or her family background because Mordecai had ordered her not to make them known. And so she doesn't. It's repeated down in verse 20. Esther had not revealed her family background or her ethnicity as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders as she always had while he raised her. Now again, Esther, in the beginning of this story, it's not her decision to keep her identity hidden, but she is presented at the beginning of the story as a bit of a pawn. She is used by Mordecai. She is used by the king. She is used really even by God to accomplish God's purposes. And so while she keeps her identity hidden, she's just used by everybody around her. But then you've got Mordecai. Most of you are familiar with the story. He faces opposition because of his identity. Chapter 3 at the beginning, you have the story of Mordecai not bowing down when Haman, who is one of the king's wise men, comes through. And that makes Haman very angry. And when Haman finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, and Haman hates the Jews, he doesn't just want to kill Mordecai, he wants to kill all of the Jews. And so he tricks the king into signing a decree that will allow essentially a ethnic cleansing. Like he's just going to wipe out the entire Jewish nation. That's what Haman wants to do. And so Mordecai, because of his identity, won't bow down to Haman. And because of his identity, is now facing a horrendous backlash of this man who just wants to take things way too far. So when Esther finds out, Mordecai says, here's the trouble. Maybe you should go before the king. It says there, chapter 4, verse 10, Esther spoke with Hathash and commanded him to tell Mordecai, all the royal officials and the people of the royal provinces know that one law applies to every man and woman who approaches the king in the inner courtyard and who has not been summoned, the death penalty. Unless the king extends the royal scepter, allowing that person to live. I have not been summoned to appear before the king for the last 30 days. Esther's response was reported to Mordecai. Esther is scared. Now, again, remember Nehemiah was scared? When the king asked, why are you sad? And what is Nehemiah's response? I've got a plan. Let's lay this out there. The king knows he's a Jew. He has a plan that matches that. Everything's fine. Esther, when she is asked to approach the king, is scared and says she can't do it. She can't do it. And maybe even the point here that I've not been summoned in 30 days, she's probably thinking maybe she's done something to fall out of favor with the king. For whatever reason, even though she is his favorite woman, she hasn't been summoned in 30 days. And so she's scared to go before the king. She's scared the king will not lower his scepter. She's scared she's going to suffer the death penalty, just like anybody else who approaches the king unannounced. But you've got that famous statement in the next couple of verses here, where Mordecai puts things in perspective. Mordecai told the messenger to reply to Esther, don't think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews because you're in the king's palace. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place, but you and your father's family will be destroyed. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Essentially, what Mordecai says here is, remember who you are. You are a Jew just like the rest of us. You will get the death penalty for your ethnicity, even if you don't get it from approaching the king. You will die either way you go here. So why not remember who you are and know that maybe God is behind this and has been behind this all along? It's interesting that at this point in the story, this is like the hinge point where everything changes. She becomes this picture of courage and purpose from this verse, from this point in the story, all the way through the end. She risked her life before the king. She has a plan when she goes to the king. That plan involves several dinners that she's going to throw for the king and for Haman. She reveals to the king who she is and what her identity is, and that she also is Jewish, and that Haman has done this awful thing in trying to erase her people off the face of the earth, and the king gets angry about it, and the king has Haman hanged, and Esther and her people saved. But all that happens because Mordecai says, remember who you are. That's the key. That's the key to decision making. It's what makes everything else easier. That's the power of identity when it comes to any sort of decision making. Turn over to Psalm 74. I'm not going to read this whole psalm. It is a bit of a long one, and we've read it before, and I've made this point before, but I want to remind you of it. It's been a while since we talked about this. Here in this particular psalm, you've got some complaining made by Asaph, who's worried about the fact that life isn't working the way he thinks it should work. That disaster is on every side, that there's going to be enemies facing them, that everything seems to not be working out the way it's supposed to work out. And from verse 1 all the way down through verse 11, it shows just how horrible things are going to be. And in verse 10, you even got, God, how long will the enemy mock? Will the foes insult your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand? Stretch out your right hand and destroy them. That's what Asaph wants to happen. And then you get to verse 12, and again, there's that switch. Yet, God, my King, is from ancient times performing saving acts on the earth. And you read through this, and you find that you've got this focus of, but if I just remember who God is, everything will be fine. The reality is, for many of us, what we've got is not just a need to remember who we are, but we need to remember who God is. And if we will remember those two things, if we will remember that we belong to a God who is amazing and powerful, who knows the future, who can work things out for us, who can make everything good, then that makes everything easier. You can face all sorts of opposition if you know it's temporary. You can face disaster on every side if you know some solution is going to come. You can face any sort of difficult circumstance of life and any sort of hard decision you need to make as long as you know you are putting your trust in God and you can put your trust in what God is doing for us. You know, Nehemiah, Esther, Mordecai, they all made life-altering decisions based on their identity, based on two things: the people of whom they were a part and the God to whom they belong. That should be us. That should be us. Every decision we make should be filtered through that. And I think sometimes we are guilty. I know I am guilty of kind of putting that on the back burner for a while and living life on my own terms. I'm going to do what I know I should be doing. I'm going to do what I know is right. I'm going to do what I think is best. And honestly, what I think is best is pretty inconsequential. Sometimes I have to do what God shows is best. Whether that's easy or not. Knowing that God might have or might be intending for me to make this decision for his purposes, not just for my purposes. We are a people who belong to God and to Jesus. And we need to remember that. As Christians, we have a God who loves us and who guides us and makes our decisions clear every step of the way. That doesn't mean every decision will be easy, but it most definitely means if you will trust in God, God will make those decisions clearer. He will give you some guidance. He will walk you through those things. And that's sometimes hard to trust in. Because I think sometimes we're like Asaph there in verse 10 and 11 where we're going, well, God, why aren't you stepping in? Where are you in this? I don't understand why you won't just take care of this so that I can just not have to be bothered with it. Anybody ever felt that way? Yeah. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe God is helping us to grow in our identity as people who trust in him and belong to him and do things his way. You know, as Christians, he gives us comfort in hard situations. Keith talked about that last Sunday night, right? The idea of the holes in our hearts and that he is the God of all comfort. I did listen to it, by the way, both sermons, by the way, and thank you all both for filling in for me. But that idea of He is a God who gives comfort. We don't always understand the comfort. We don't always understand where the peace comes from. It is a peace that passes understanding, right? Philippians 4:6. We don't understand how we can be peaceful in hard moments, but we do. The world is the one who can't understand our peace. We can. We understand it because we have a God who is the God of all comforts. And I love that there in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, it says, it reveals to us one of the ways that God gives us all comfort is through the way he has comforted his people and the way they share that comfort with others. So we receive comfort from those who have already been comforted. That's one of the ways God does it. Looking back at the story of Esther, while Esther probably didn't like Mordecai's reply that maybe you were put in this place for such a time as this, like that's probably not what she wanted to hear. She wanted to hear likely was, hey, he doesn't know you're a Jew. We've hidden that fact from the beginning. Just continue on that way. And I love you. You're my niece, your family. I want to just protect you. You just pretend you're not a Jew. Keep that little story going, and you'll be fine, and I'll figure out what's best for the rest of it. That's probably what she wanted to hear. But that's not the story of remembering who you are. We have a God who brings us comfort because of who we are. Because of who we are a part of. As Christians, God tends to walk with us through difficult times. We all have them. The Bible does not guarantee ease of life, and it does not guarantee that things are going to be, you're going to have a nice little golden sidewalk that you walk all the way from here until you get to the promised land. That's not the picture of walking with Jesus. The picture of walking with Jesus is carrying the cross with him. Right? That's what it means to follow Jesus. But I love that it's carrying the cross with him, because that means he's carrying the cross with us. And we need to be people who are comforted by that, who are guided by that we are doing things God's way because God will be with us if we do it that way. And then as Christians, we got to realize that our other roles in life become directed and supported and aided by our main identity, which is being a Christian. Years ago, back when I was in college in psychology class, our professor had us do an exercise. I think I've told you all about this before. I don't remember 4 years in what stories I've told and what stories I haven't. So some of these will be repeated. I apologize. But we did essentially a pie chart. And the pie chart was name 7 hats that you wear as a human, roles that you play. Father, the ones we did earlier, father, son, friend, student, employee. It could be any of the roles that we play. And basically it said, divide your pie up based on how much each role plays in your life. And so all of us did it. We divided our pie up into 7 pieces, and for some of us, being a friend was a quarter of the pie, and others of us, it was a tiny little sliver. Or being an employee or a student might be half of the pie because we were in college at the time, but for me, it was like maybe 3%. It wasn't a great student at that point. So, you divided your pie up based on how important your roles were. And because it was Florida College, pretty much all of us had one of our hats that we wore was being a Christian. And so we would give that segment of our pie. Then we were given another circle, and it said, now divide up the same 7 roles based on the amount of time you give to each one. Oh, man, talk about a kick in the gut. We're all really dutiful Christians, and so we maybe 50% of our pie was being a Christian. Like that's really important to us. But then when we were really being honest, maybe 10% of our pie was the time we devoted to being a Christian. And that was because we had mandatory chapel and Bible classes there, like we had to be a Christian in those cases. And so we are looking at these two little circles and seeing just how disconnected our priorities made. It's a great exercise, by the way, if you ever want to do that for yourself. But then there was one student in the class, and I don't remember who it was, but I remember the comment that they made, which was, I don't think being a Christian should be a part of the pie. Being a Christian is the whole pie. And I thought, oh, man, I have missed it. But they're right. There's not a single other role I play in life that isn't apt or shouldn't be incredibly affected by the truth that I belong to God. The kind of husband that I am should be 100% directed by the fact that I belong to Jesus. The kind of father that I am and the way that I treat my children and the conversations we have should be 100% directed by the fact that I am a man who believes in the Bible and who is a man of faith. The kind of employee that I am, the kind of preacher that I am, the kind of even the work of being a Christian that I do should all be affected by the identity that I belong to God. And I'll be the first to admit I've done a poor job of that through the years. As a Christian, every role in my life is affected by the truth of who I am. And the great thing about that is we started the whole thing is the whole on a regular basis as a Christian, zero. Doesn't mean there aren't shows that are acceptable, but the whole channel probably zero, right? I mean, it's just one of those, my options become minimal as a Christian because I'm trying to live a different way. Same's true with what I do on a Friday night. Same's true with where I go on family vacation. The same is true in the way that I interact with my coworkers. The same is true with even what kind of job I take. It makes a difference. One of my great friends from college got a degree in advertising. And within 5 years, he had to change entire career trajectories because he could not find a job that would not allow him to not create advertising for companies that he felt promoted ungodly things. Doesn't mean it can't be done. He couldn't find the job. It made a difference. Had a friend who was a few years older than me who decided to quit playing college football as quarterback with all of the kickbacks that he was not supposed to get, but he got anyway, so that he could, because he was a new Christian and knew that wasn't the environment for him, and ended up going down to Florida for school. He made life-altering decisions because he was a Christian. Brothers and sisters, we need to all be willing to make those kind of decisions. What conversations do you need to have? What relationships do you need to build? What life choices do you need to make in order to reflect that you remember who you are? That you are a child of the King who is to work in a kingdom until we are brought home. That can make the difference. If you're not a child of God, well, then you've got a pretty simple choice, because right now your identity is probably not one you want to hold on to. If you've not had your sins washed away in baptism, if you're guilty of sins, if you're guilty of doing things that are contrary to the will of God, then you are not you currently don't belong to God. And you've got the option to get that fixed tonight. You have the option to have your sins washed away in baptism. Are you willing to do it? It will change your identity. It will change who you are, because God will recreate you, and it'll change the life trajectory you have for yourself. But I tell you, It also changes the future. It changes the end. It changes your destiny. It changes your inheritance. It changes what you'll gain after life. It changes everything about your future.